It's a familiar sight, a simple bottle of cough syrup. A standard combination of active ingredients prescribed to children suffering from a common cold. And like most syrups, it used a common pharmaceutical solvent, propylene glycol, to dissolve those ingredients and create the medicine. It was supposed to provide them relief, but instead, for at least 24 children in India, it delivered a lethal poison. Diethylene glycol, an industrial solvent used in antifreeze and brake fluids. The manufacturer used a cheaper industrial grade solvent instead of standard pharmaceutical solvent, and this batch was contaminated with DEG, and it was found in the final medicine at the concentration 486 times the accepted safe limits. This is the story of ColdRiff cough syrup tragedy. It's not just a news headline, it's one of the most important case studies in Indian pharmaceutical history. For those of us studying to be pharmacists, doctors and healthcare professionals, this case is not optional. It's a case study in toxicology, systemic regulation and catastrophic failure. Welcome to Clarigen. Let's find clarity in this tragedy and understand what we as future custodians of healthcare must learn from it. Our timeline begins in late August 2025. Children in Chhindwara district of Madhya Pradesh, some in Rajasthan, began presenting to hospitals. The symptoms are severe: fever, vomiting and acute kidney injury. The first confirmed child death linked to the syndrome was reported in Chhindwara. As cases mount, physicians in Nagpur recognized this symptom. They suspected diethylene glycol poisoning. As events moved quickly, Madhya Pradesh authorities contacted the Tamil Nadu Drug Control Department to investigate the syrup's manufacturer, Sun Pharmaceuticals. On October 2nd, the Tamil Nadu FDA inspected the facility and orders production to be halted. On October 3rd, their lab results confirms the worst. The reports found that the ColdRiff batch SR13 found 48.6% diethylene glycol contamination, which is 486 times the internationally accepted safe limit. A shutdown order is issued immediately. Concurrently, Dr. Praveen Soni, a pediatrician who has prescribed the syrup, is arrested. The owner of Sun Pharmaceuticals, G. Ranganathan, is arrested by SIT. The World Health Organization issues a global medical product alert. The alert identifies ColdRiff and two other syrups, RespiFresh and Relife, from different pharmaceutical manufacturers contaminated with diethylene glycol. So, how did this happen? The investigation at Sun Pharmaceuticals revealed a failure of good manufacturing practices. The manufacturer's license was permanently revoked. The timeline shows the what, the GMP failure shows the how. But for us, the real question is the why. Why is diethylene glycol so toxic? What does this molecule actually do to the human body?
The toxicology is clear. The story of the Madhya Pradesh tragedy is heartbreaking. 24 is the number of children that lost their lives. The medicine that was supposed to help them killed them. How? Because it was contaminated with a chemical called diethylene glycol or DEG. But what does this industrial solvent actually do to the human body? It's a terrifying three-stage process. Stage 1, the deceptive start. First, after ingesting the syrup, the initial symptoms are deceptive. The person experiences nausea, vomiting and abdominal pain. It looks just like a common stomach bug. But beneath the surface, the betrayal is happening. The liver tries to break down the DEG, but in that process, it creates a far more potent poison called diglycolic acid. As this acid builds up, the blood turns acidic, a condition called metabolic acidosis. Stage 2, the fatal window. This is the most critical phase and the primary cause of death. Between 24 and 48 hours of consumption, the diglycolic acid launches an all-out assault on the kidney. It causes acute tubular necrosis, which means the functional parts of the kidney are literally being killed off. They fail completely. The body's filtration system shuts down and the person stops producing urine. This is called anuria. With the kidneys offline, the body is poisoned by its own waste. The acidosis becomes severe and the patient can fall into coma. This is the stage where most death occurs. Stage 3, the survivor's burden. By now, if the patient is still lucky enough to survive this catastrophic failure, the nightmare still isn't over. We now enter the final stage, delayed neurological complications. Days later, the poison which has been circulating in the body attacks the nervous system, which causes facial palsies, optic nerve damage, and often permanent crippling nerve damage to their limbs. The unspeakable tragedy, why it kills children. Now take this entire timeline and apply it to a small child under the age of 8, like those 24 children of MP case. That's why it's not just a poisoning, it's a sure short death sentence for 3 key reasons. First, the dose. A child's body mass is very less. A standard spoonful of contaminated syrup isn't a dose for them. It is a massive, overwhelming overdose of a lethal poison. Second, their defenses. A child's kidney and liver are still developing. They simply do not have the metabolic power to deal with this heavy dose. As a result, their organs shut down completely. But the third and the most tragic reason is the fatal trap of stage 1. Think about it. Your child has a cough. You gave them cough syrup. And a few hours later, he starts vomiting and have diarrhea. What do you as a parent think can goes wrong? You might think it as a stomach bug or maybe a common flu. But you would never suspect that the medicine itself could be the problem. So while you rush to take care of your child, you don't realize that the real danger is already inside their body.
हमको देख पा रहे हैं आप? देख रहे हो हमको? नहीं दिख रहा है, हमको नहीं देख पा रहे.
So how did a poison like diethylene glycol or DEG end up in a ColdRiff cough syrup? This tragedy highlights a critical question. How do you even test medicines for these industrial contaminants? The problem is that DEG and EG are poison. They are antifreeze. The official safety limit in medicine is incredibly low, no more than 0.1%. To catch this, lab use a two-step process. A first step is a screening test called as thin layer chromatography or TLC. Think of it as a chemical race. The spot of this medicine is put on a plate, and as the solvent moves up, the chemicals get separated. For this test, DEG and EG move together and are turned into yellow spots. But TLC has a major weakness. Its detection limit is between 0.2 to 0.5%. Since the safety limit is only 0.1%, TLC could miss a dangerously contaminated sample. This is a much more powerful and accurate method. That's why, to be certain, advanced lab used gold standard, that is gas chromatography or GC. This is a much more powerful and accurate method. A GC machine takes a sample, heats it and turns it into a gas. It passes this gas through a long column which perfectly separates every single chemical including DEG and EG. The sensitive detector measures the exact amount of each chemical. This is the crucial difference. Unlike TLC, GC is extremely sensitive and can detect contamination up to 0.1%.
But here's the painful truth. In our research, we found a 1998 case in Gurugram, Delhi, where diethylene glycol poisoning caused dozens of child deaths. A scientific paper from that time clearly identified the cause. First, the negligence in testing, and second, the use of industrial grade solvents in medicine. That was over 2 decades ago. It wasn't an isolated event. It was one among the 9 deadly mass poisoning India has ever seen. For more than 50 years, the same tragedy has repeated again and again. 1972 Chennai, 15 children die. 1986 Mumbai, 14 people die. 1988 Bihar, at least 11 die. 1988 Gurugram, 33 children die. 2020 Jammu, 11 children die. Then the warnings went global. 2022 The Gambia, 70 children die. 2022 Uzbekistan, 68 children die. 2023 Cameroon, 6 children die. More than 250 people, mostly children, killed by the same preventable mistake. 9 tragedies and one single repeating pattern. The story is not about just one factory. This is a systemic failure. Cause: industrial grade solvents like DEG are substituted for pharmaceutical grade excipients. Failure: pharmaceutical failed to test this raw material for identity and purity. Result: the regulators only catch the failure after the reports of death emerge. The sole reason behind each of these events is the failure to test raw materials. After the 2025 ColdRiff tragedy and years of international pressure, the Indian regulators finally made a change. On October 10, 2025, in the middle of this crisis, the Indian Pharmacopoeia Commission made the testing of DEG and EG mandatory for all oral liquid formulations. But this raises the most important questions of all. This new rule is the reactive measure. It took 9 tragedies and over 250 deaths to make a simple yet fundamental test compulsory. As future pharmacists and healthcare leaders, our standard cannot be reactive, it should be proactive. The first tragedy in the 1972 should have been the last. This was predictable and hence preventable catastrophe. This brings us to the most important part of our analysis. For us as students and future custodians of medicine, what are the critical lessons we should learn from this failure? First, the factory failure, a complete breakdown of good manufacturing practices. The company responsible was cited for a staggering 364 violations. They operated without a qualified chemist. They even failed to maintain basic records. This wasn't just a minor slip-up, it was a systemic failure of quality assurance and quality control. Second, the root cause, the failure of supply chain integrity. A safe pharmaceutical grade excipient, propylene glycol, was substituted with a cheap industrial grade solvent. That one reckless decisions to cut costs led to those deaths. But the most alarming fact is this is the 9th such mass poisoning in India since 1972. The US had its last major incident in 1937. This isn't an isolated event. This is a chronic sickness in our regulatory system. The only reason it was identified was due to the pharmacovigilance. Doctors and pharmacists on the front line recognized a fatal pattern of acute kidney failure and linked it to the syrup. They become a final safety checkpoint in a system, the system which has already failed from top to the bottom. This incident exposes a mindset which prioritizes profits over public health. It reveals a failure of quality analysis in manufacturing, and it forces us to ask the hard questions about the ethics between the prescribers and the industry. The cost is not just the loss of lives, it is also the loss of global trust in India as the pharmacy of the world. The children who died in MP were not just the victims of poisoning, they were victims of a broken system, a system that for 50 years has failed to learn from its own tragic history. But the system is not abstract, it's our system, and we are the ones who will inherit it. The final lesson from these 9 tragedies is that we cannot be reactive. The standard for us as future pharmacists must be proactive. A proactive standard means we don't just trust, we verify, we demand accountability, and we never stop pursuing clarity.